Hello again, everyone. So, today we are on to the third of our Heroes of the Faith, and today we get two for the price of one because we're looking at the story of Paul and Silas, how they were captured and thrown into jail, how they worshipped in jail, how they were miraculously saved, and then they helped to bring a family of the enemy to Jesus. So, first, let's look at how they ended up in jail. So there was a servant girl who was acting as a fortune teller, and she had a spirit inside her. And the girl's owners were making a lot of money out of this until Paul and Silas came along, drove out the spirit, basically ended their hustle in one move. Now, the owners obviously weren't too happy about this, and they managed to turn the town on Paul and Silas. They had them unfairly put on trial and then thrown into jail. So, the first person I want you to think about here is Silas. So, he's been merrily following Paul around. He's been spreading the good news of Jesus. And then Paul quite impulsively acts, driving out the spirit from this girl and starting a chain of events that ended up with them in jail. Now, I wonder how we'd feel in his shoes. Maybe we'd feel like having a bit of a go at Paul. Saying, why did you have to go and do that? Look at the trouble you've got us in. This can't have been God's plan for you to do that. Because that's sometimes our reaction when life takes a difficult turn. We immediately think that something's gone wrong, either with our plan or with God's plan, because we've ended up in a place that we really shouldn't be in. But is that actually true? Are difficulties not supposed to happen? Was Paul and Silas going to jail not supposed to happen? Had something gone wrong to put them in jail? Or was this actually God's plan all along? Well, it seems God did have a plan, and just as importantly, Paul and Silas went for it. They set the example of what you do when you hit a roadblock in life because they turned immediately to God. They didn't complain or moan or yell at God for the fact they were in jail for doing his work. No, instead they prayed and they worshipped loudly at midnight in jail, surrounded by other prisoners. Now, the fact that that sounds like such a crazy thing to do is exactly why it's so great. Because, they could have gone quiet, realising that being so bold and loud about their faith was exactly what got them in the trouble in the first place. But they didn't. They worshipped and everybody heard them. So now, put yourselves in the shoes of a fellow prisoner witnessing this. Here you see two guys who've been beaten up, stripped, locked and bound, and yet they are singing praises with all their heart at midnight. You start to wonder who this Jesus fellow was they were singing to, right? It's one thing for people to see us praising in a church setting or in good times. But when we praise in the storms of life, when we praise when things have gone badly wrong, when we praise in the really difficult moments, that might be when people really sit up and take notice. Because not only does it reinforce the depth and the strength of our own faith, but it shows others the strength of faith too. It shows others just how much Jesus means to us. To anybody watching, they can't help but be intrigued if our praise comes before our panic. So back to the story. So Paul and Silas are praising, and suddenly the jail is rocked by a violent earthquake. All the prison doors are opened, all the chains are broken, everybody's free. Now again, let's just put ourselves in Paul and Silas' shoes for a moment. You'd run for it, right? You'd sprint. You've been given a chance to escape. God has given you a chance to reset everything, get out there and get away from this jail. You'd just go as fast as you could. But that's not what they did. In that moment, they recognised, and we don't know how, but they recognised that there was more that God wanted them to do in jail. And if they ran, they wouldn't accomplish that. And that's exactly how it proved. They were there to bring the jailer of all people to Jesus. Now, it's worth bearing in mind at this point, the jailer was very much an enemy. He had been asked to guard them carefully, but he went way further than that. He locked them in the innermost cell, he bound their feet. So it would have been pretty easy for Paul and Silas to just ignore him and just not really worry what happened to him at all. But after demonstrating their love for Jesus so emphatically to the other prisoners, they now took the command of loving their enemy to heart too. So instead of running, instead of ignoring him, they called out to him, telling him not to harm or punish himself. And at that moment, the jailer saw the truth. He saw that these were righteous men, that these were men of God, and he wanted the same for himself. So he falls to his knees and says, "What do I have to do to be saved?" And Paul and Silas say that he just needs to believe. So he sits there and he washes their wounds. Paul and Silas baptize him and his whole family, and then they even go on and eat together. It is quite an amazing turnaround. A relationship has been created between enemies, and a relationship has also been created between the jailer and his family and God. And when you think about it, it is such a relief to know that Paul and Silas didn't hold a grudge. They didn't consider what the jailer deserved or didn't deserve. They still just opened his path up to being saved. Why is that so reassuring? Well, ultimately it's because that's what God does for us. The reality is, if we got what we deserved, we wouldn't get to sit alongside Jesus in the end either. And that's why the gift of the cross is so amazing. Because without it, we are that jailer, except there's no one coming to save us. We're just condemned there to die. So Jesus took what we deserved on that cross, and he built a bridge, even though we really don't deserve it. Even with a litany of mistakes behind us, he still holds out his hand to us. And Paul knows this better than most. He's a loyal follower of Jesus at this stage, but he was very much the opposite in the past. But that's a story for another day. So what can we take from this? Well, for me, it's two things. The first is that things going wrong doesn't mean the plan's gone wrong. Wherever we find ourselves, that's the field we're supposed to work in that moment for God. The real step of faith is changing our mindset from suspecting something's gone wrong and getting frustrated and bitter and angry at where we've ended up, to instead realizing that this is just the next paragraph. It's just the next chapter in the story God is writing of our lives, and faithfully turning the page to see what comes next. And the second thing is that we can praise in the storms. Like any relationship, when times are good, being positive is so much easier. But bumps in the road are the real challenge. If we can celebrate the Lord, if we can find joy in our faith when things are going wrong, then we really strengthen our foundations and we can show the world what the love of Jesus is all about. Because everybody deserves to know. Amen.